And now let me introduce Dr. Bijan. He is the CEO of Dynamica International. Mr. Dr. Bijan is an Italian citizen, and he has worked and lived in different parts of the world. He has a bachelor degree in science with honors degree in Naval Academy of Livorno in Italy. He has an MBA, and he is a doctorate in electronics engineering from University of Genova in Italy. Mr. Bijan is the founder and CEO of Dynamica International Ventures Development, a business innovation and restructuring management consultancy firm with operations in Europe and GCC. He is an accomplished international business innovator and entrepreneur who has operated across several correlated industries around the world in very senior positions. He has worked in the domains of IT, telecom, logistics, automotive, retail, e-commerce, finance, and insurance. For the last 1 decade, he has focused on the automotive and smart mobility transformation, collaborating with international OEMs, technology service providers, and government entities. And all these efforts have been aimed at developing innovative, feasible, scalable, and sustainable solutions. He is currently on the boards and advisory roles of Strategic Advisor, City Forums UK, Advisor to a Public Authority in GCC, and he is in the board and programs director of Bahrain Smart City Society. He also has interests on participating in several events as well as academia collaboration. He is the author of several executive, strategic business innovation and transformation programs, has conducted several clinics and advisory workshops. Over to you, Dr. Bijan. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Bijan.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me share my presentation. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Can you see it?
No, I'm sorry. We still can't see your presentation. Yes.
All right. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Very briefly, today, in these 20 minutes, I will be talking about the role of the transportation sector in terms of energy consumption in the world and its impact on emissions. And what is the transportation sector doing to reach the zero emissions target? And in particular, what's the role of electric vehicles and what has happened in the last decade, and what can Bahrain do to move forward and to excel in this journey? Now, we may know that transportation has an impact of about 30% of the total energy consumption in the world. So it's one of the biggest contributors of energy consumption. In terms of electricity, the good news is that basically the forecast is that the contribution of renewable energy to the electricity generation in the world will be around 51% in 2035, which is good because there are many voices have been in the last decade about, yes, but electric vehicles consume energy to generate electricity, and that is a source of pollution. So now we know that by 2050, above 70% of the electricity generated in the world will be produced by some sort of renewable in terms of solar, wind, or hydro. Now, we live in a greenhouse, and the CO2 plays an important role as a greenhouse gas. And you may know that CO2 is not only generated by us, anthropogenic CO2, man-made developed, which is around 43 billion tons a year, but actually there's a natural exchange of CO2 between nature, around 750 billion tons, which is a bigger part of what we as human beings develop, but we are creating an unbalanced situation, contributing to the global warming with our emission of greenhouse gases. Now, in particular, internal combustion engine vehicle generates CO2 and many other gases in particulates. Now, CO2 is about 4.6 metric tons per vehicle per year. Now, you need at least 200 trees in 1 year to offset the impact of one single vehicle. So you can see the impact of CO2 derived by the transportation industry is very, very significant. Now, the contributors to this phenomenon are China. You can see it, it's a very big contributor, US, Europe, and others. And obviously, regulation is playing an important role to control this growth. And we'll see how. Bahrain, in this scenario, has also seen a growth, a continuous growth of its CO2 emission. And when we look at the per capita, Bahrain has one of the highest, actually, per capitas in the world, around 22 tons per person per year. Now, if you look at the small graphic to the right, you see that North America, some of the European countries, their CO2 contribution per capita is decreasing, while China, India, and Brazil are still on the uptrend. Now, air quality, again, transportation has an impact of air quality. Air quality in the world is measured with air quality index, and there are 5 major air pollutants. And again, here, CO2 is not included in this, but there are others that, in particulars, are very important because they have a very heavy impact on the health care. Now, again, look, it's between good and hazardous. Again, Bahrain is positioned almost consistently in the top 10 in terms of polluted, in particular on a particulate matter, 2.5 microns. And if you go on the US Embassy portal today, you will see that we are right now on the unhealthy situation, moderate to unhealthy situation. And this is due to, obviously, from the transportation, man-made islands. We know that Bahrain is surrounded by shallow water, so we keep expanding industrial activities, and obviously also some natural phenomena like dust and sandstorm. So we cannot just contribute all these effects to man-made developed pollutants. Now, the driving forces in reducing these emissions, regulations and policies are number 1. Technology is an enabler. We have the technology, but the technology by itself is not enough. And economics, both in terms of return on investment and return on health. If you just stick to the economics, we will be burning coal for the next 200 years. So it has to go hand in hand, and regulations and policies plays the most important role. Now, as an example, I look at Europe. Europe have consistently set CO2 emission targets in the last 10 years in terms of gram per kilometer, and they have achieved it. They didn't put one big target at the beginning of the decade, they put gradually. At the same time, they created incentives for the purchase of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And it's a carrot and stick situation. And they also started penalizing the internal combustion engines to the point that, you know, most of the countries in Europe and around the world, the industrial countries, have set the specific dates to reduce and ban altogether the internal combustion engines from being sold in their countries. Now, Norway has reached already in 2019 the target set by the European Community for 2030. So they are 10 years ahead of the curve, and they have reached an average of 59 grams of CO2 per kilometer. Now, the CO2 zero carbon transport impact, it will not achieve overnight. And by 2040, the 2 and 3 wheelers will probably reach the zero CO2 emissions, and all the way down to 2070 for passenger cars. But it will not be offsetted in the next 10 years as maybe somebody could expect. Now, in context, we are living in a world of around 1.5 billion vehicles. Of this, less than 1% are electric today. Now, the forecast is by 2030, 2040, we will reach around 20%. So it's a long marathon. It will not happen overnight. Last year, we had 20% decrease in all the car sales and vehicle sales sold around the world. But at the same time, the electric vehicles had a jump of 43%. So that's major. And last year, the car sales, the electric vehicle sales represented 4.2% of the global sales. China, Europe, and US being the leaders in this performance. The forecast is that by 2033, approximately 50% of all the vehicles sold in the world will be electric. So that's 10 years from now, 12 years from now. And by 2040, around 70%. So again, it's a long, long way. But look at Norway. Norway has already reached 56% in 2019 and 75% last year. So they have already reached the goal of 2040. So it's not mission impossible, but Norway started 20 years ago to set up regulations, tax benefits, incentives, parking, limited circulation, access to electric vehicles, toll waivers, insurance bonus. They work parallel on every possible element in terms of carrot and stick, and that is the result. They are basically 22 years ahead of the rest of the world with all the benefits. And by the way, Norway has petrol. The other good thing about Norway is that it's over 85% of their energy is already renewable through hydropower. Now, the paradigm of electric cars is that you need chargers. And the charger is a little bit like you have a mobile phone and you have more than one charger. This is going to happen. You will have different chargers. Some who are lucky and have a garage, they can install it at home and can put a photovoltaic system on their roof, and they are completely green, both in terms of utilization for their daily life and for their motorization. But this is the trend, and this takes billions of dollars to be built. Now, we are in an irreversible situation. We know that the technology is there. The business model, many people have lost money in the last 20 years on this sector of electric vehicles. The ecosystem and the stakeholder rules is coming to align itself. And the incumbents, the utility providers, oil and gas, from being, let's say, kind of hostile to this whole movement in the last decade, have become active drivers of this proposition. And there are best practice countries, as I mentioned, in terms of Norway and the Scandinavian countries. Bahrain has the opportunity, due to its location and the size, to become a best practice country in the world. There are three types of electric vehicles: fully electric, plug-in electric, and fuel cell electric. It still uses an electric motor, but it utilizes hydrogen to develop electricity. To complicate matters, there are different levels of charging, and there are different levels of connection types. You know, everybody at home has a different connection in Europe compared to Japan, compared to the US, and this has been carried. So we have not learned. Despite this being a relatively new industry, we still came with a Japanese version, US version, and the European version, creating complications for the automotive and electric vehicle charging infrastructure developers. There are different places where you can charge your vehicle, mostly at home during the night, or at work when you're working, or when you go to do shopping, where you can leave your vehicle for quite some time. So the paradigm of using a gas station to leave the vehicle there to be charged is not going to work, because first of all, you use a fast DC charging system, and still takes 30 minutes. So you can imagine having a line of cars, each of them keeping 30 minutes to fill in their batteries. The ecosystem is complex. Renewable energy is playing a major upstream role. The stakeholders, I'm not going to go through all of them. Just look at them. There's everybody. It's from the original equipment manufacturers, it's from utilities, it's from the charge point operator. This is a new figure because you operator who is investing, building, and operating the infrastructure. If you want to do it all internally in terms of government, then you have to put all the capex and all the opex to run this business. Financial institutions, government and municipalities, and then last but not least, this new game needs a central organization to facilitate the information exchange, roaming and routing, because when you charge your vehicle, you're actually communicating with certain protocols also in terms of telecommunication with your charging station, point station, and provider. So it's not only an electricity game, it's also a telecommunication game. Now, they're all trying to figure out, and there are still some conflicts amongst the operators. This is a nutshell showing you basically the stakeholders. The cost. Look, so many EV charging network operators have jumped on the bandwagon. That is amazing. Look at it, from technology providers to automotive equipment manufacturers, to utilities, to look at Shell, look at BP. They are very active in this game. As an example, I show you what Shell and Total and Sinopec in China and BP are doing. Basically, they're buying companies. They're buying companies, they're buying infrastructure, they're buying startups, and they are putting it under an organized umbrella because they believe that they don't want to be the next Kodak of the world. So they have to go to this disruptive proposition. Now, utilities, it's a little bit more tricky because for electric generators, they can either walk, jog, or run. Run means that I want to be also on the field and doing the business. But in some countries, the regulator has doesn't allow electric utility to be also a retailer as a charging electric vehicle charging operator. So it has to be seen in Bahrain how we want to play the game. OEMs, you read it, you listen to it, you watch it. Everybody from Tesla downwards, newcomers, existing incumbents, everybody has said that by 2030, 2035, the latest, they will only produce and sell electric vehicles in one form or the other. Now, facts. It's not going to be a revolution because, you know, with 15 kilowatt, you can travel 100 kilometers. And
sorry, Mr. Bijan, sorry to interrupt you. If you can, 5 more minutes, please. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
The electric vehicles will consume, but the renewable energy targets that countries have given themselves, this will completely offset the additional power. But it has to be some twitch in terms of power demand and load peak curves, because everybody will try to charge the car in the night. So there will be some smart gridding and smart to be done. Now, Germany, just to see it, by 2050, the projection of McKinsey is that they will need only a 4% increase of their electricity capacity, which is around 20 gigawatts. So it's not huge, but as I said, the load has to be transformed. Now, what can Bahrain do? There are so many benefits for Bahrain. First of all, you reduce the pollution. You improve your fuel energy efficiency and consumption. You increase the deployment of renewable energy, solar in particular, jobs, creation of new jobs and roles, and create a modern and easy to maintain infrastructure. Bahrain is only 740 square kilometers. This is the place for kilometers. Improve citizen quality of life and generate revenue for both the incumbent, the administrator, and cost saving for the user. Now, Bahrain has some problems. It's one of the highest per capita consumption in the world in terms of electricity, but at the same time has the highest solar radiation levels in the world, and has the opportunity to really do a difference. There are around 800,000 vehicles circulating in Bahrain, and you saw every car 7.5 tons, equivalent to 200 cars. Now, not many people know that in the GCC, Bahrain has the highest motorization rate. Look at Bahrain, 820 vehicles on 1,000 people compared to UAE, which is only 211. So we are 4 times more car owner with comparison to UAE. Obviously, this depends on the mix of the demographics of the countries, but it's a matter of fact. Now, to do planning. Without planning, nothing is achieved. And we have to have short-term, mid-term, and long-term planning consistent. The short-term is about finding the sandboxes where execute pilots, where do feasibility tests on everything, not only on technology, but also on the business, on the partnership, on the regulation, and do it where there is really need to save money. You don't put it from the perspective of reducing the emission, but from the perspective of economics. Then once the pilot has given his result, you scale it up, and then you continue your scale up, and you try to do everything in terms of PPP, private-public partnership, because if there is a good field for operating, the investor will come, but you have to be convinced that you have the vision and you have the proper regulations and policies in place to make it happen. Well, this is my last slide. So it's a marathon. It needs planning. Without planning, this will not happen. Regulators and legislators have the greatest impact on the speed of change. We saw what Norway has achieved, and they have to operate on 4 areas. First, clean up the current internal combustion engine. We have more than 12 years average age of our vehicles in Bahrain. So, and give CO2 emissions. Bahrain doesn't have CO2 emission targets. Europe has started giving these targets 10 years ago. Maybe it's a pan-GCC exercise, but Bahrain has to have that. The electric vehicle penetration will not happen overnight, but regulations and standards and incentives will play a role, and infrastructure. Then obviously public transportation. Do by example, drive by example. I know that we have relatively new red buses traveling around the country, but we don't start with them. There are so many other areas that the government can start doing the experimentation, always with the business and the cost efficiency. Last but not least, pedestrians, bicycles, and what we call micro-mobility. We need to have urban planning, regulations, and the infrastructure in a holistic way. Too many people die on bicycles. Nobody really uses bicycles. If you give them this, despite the high temperature and humidity, we will be surprised that people will use bicycles, and in the future, electric bikes. And pedestrians, those, if you simplify the point A to point B mobility for pedestrians, then obviously people will not use any other form of mobility. So this is basically it. And include and commit all the key stakeholders, that they're everybody, from the automotive OEM to the dealer to the charging infrastructure. Decide how you want to run this infrastructure with regulations, with license, without license, open to everybody. And then obviously start with by prioritizing where you want to start. More or less, and Bahrain has done it fantastically with the renewable energy. They had a pilot, they started with the school, they moved to the roofs of the government offices. That's how you do it, by bringing real results. Believe me, you don't start with a PR campaign towards people. People are only convinced when, and the habits will change in time, also pretty quickly, when there is cost convenience and the regulations and availability of vehicles at the right price and an infrastructure that guarantees that they can save money and be happy. Then the byproduct is that we will have also a green environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bijan, for your excellent presentation. Hopefully, we will see some electrical vehicles on the roads of Bahrain quite soon. I think we have the next sessions lined up, which will throw some information, what's happening on the electrical vehicle standards